On this episode, we'll discuss creating belonging in the church through innovation and inclusion. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. I'm Kendall Connor, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jessica Moore. Hey, how are you there, Jess?
Good morning, Kendall. I guess it's actually afternoon for us now.
Yeah, we're getting into the afternoon. How are you? Are you doing all right?
Yes. Yep. It's been a day, but yes, I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
I don't know about you, but I have really been enjoying this warmer weather, just really been jumping headfirst into springtime and soaking up all of the great weather. I think I've said here on the podcast before that I just love getting outdoors and spending lots of time and out there with my kids. And so it's a good season. And today is feeling like a good day for a podcast. So I'm excited. We have an incredible guest that's joining us, and that is Russ Ewell. And let me tell you all about him. He has actually been on our podcast before. And so I would say, first of all, if you haven't checked out that episode, to definitely go back and to watch that one, to listen to that one, because it is so informative, got so much great content. But I'm excited to jump into this conversation today. Let me tell you more about him. Russ says that fortune smiled on him the day that he became a father of a family with disabilities. Facing human limitations in his family and fighting to overcome them has given him a passion for helping others to do the same. He does this by focusing on a few different areas. Those include spirituality, leadership, inclusivity, and technology. And he has more than 40 years of ministry experience, and he currently serves as the executive minister at Bay Area Christian Church, making a big difference out in the Silicon Valley and beyond. He is an author, and he's touched on subjects such as providing hope for those that have been turned off by traditional churches or religion. And he combines that with a vision for building the transformative church. He's the CEO of Digital Scribbler, as well as the founder of Hope Technology Group and Esports. You can tell that this is going to be a great conversation today, and we're going to be talking on the subject of creating belonging in the church through innovation and inclusion. And for all our listeners, I can tell you right now that you're just going to love hearing his heart and his unique perspective that he brings. Before we jump into our conversation today, I'd like to encourage all of our listeners at home to hit the follow button wherever you're enjoying our podcast, or if you're watching over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We want to make sure that you stay in the loop as we continue to release all of these conversations and provide these resources. And that is really the best way to make sure that you don't miss a thing. And so without further ado, let's jump into our conversation. Let's welcome Russ. Hey there. How are you, Russ? Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here, Kendall and Jessica, and I'm excited.
We are so excited to have you. Kendall just read your bio, which was incredible. But what is something that maybe doesn't make the public bio that your friends or family would know?
I'm going to give you two things.
Ooh,
First
okay.
of all, I'm a big Michigan Wolverines fan, and we play Oklahoma this year. And we plan to give you a loss and put Oklahoma and the state into discouragement. That's our goal. The other thing is, but it won't be, it probably will be in my bio eventually here, because science and chemistry was my first love, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a chemist and play in the NBA. That was my goal. In the off season, I'd be a chemist, and during the regular season, I'd be an NBA player.
Lofty.
What a combination. Goals. Yeah, I love that.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. Well, Russ, can you tell us a little bit about your story? I mean, your journey just includes so much. It has ministry, it has entrepreneurship, and I know that you've been involved in accessibility innovation. Where did this passion really just get started for you?
Yeah, I think if I look at my journey from with some perspective, meaning going back, which is a longer way back than it used to be. When I was in school, high school, I remember specifically, we had a special ed class, and we'd see them from time to time. And I was one of those kids who used all the wrong words. And I didn't make fun of those kids, but we would make fun of each other using the
Wow.
definitions and derogatory statements would be made towards special needs kids. So that was between whatever ages 14 and 18. And then, went off to college and got married. And then 3 years into marriage, we had our first son. And I think I've spoken about this before in other places, but we had our first son. And, of course, we were excited and we remained excited. But we did not know he was going to have Down syndrome until we were in the delivery room.
Wow.
We had no idea, and we were in the delivery room, and they brought in the on-call pediatrician, just to do the basics for a newborn. She
Sure.
said these words: "Of course, your son has Down syndrome." Now, my first thing was I didn't even know what that was, so I kind of stood there, but my wife knew exactly what it was, and she had a background in education and from college and work, and so we were hit with that right in the moment. And then he had to be flown he was born in Alexandria, Virginia. And so we were living in Washington, D.C. area. And he had to be flown immediately to Washington, D.C. Children's Hospital, which is one of the best children's hospitals,
Right.
for a duodenal atresia operation, because some kids with Down syndrome have heart challenges, but other kids have a blockage, an intestinal blockage that occurs, that if they don't have that repaired immediately, they won't be able to eat. And so he was helicopter flown. I had to get in the car and drive down to Washington, D.C. Children's from Alexandria, Virginia, which it's not as far as it sounds, but it's not right next door. And that was the beginning of our experience. But the story that I believe is God-driven. The whole story is God-driven. But the part where I knew something special was happening is as I was waiting in the hall, because someone was going to come and talk to me about Down syndrome, because they realized I didn't know about it, while my wife Gail was finishing up, because she literally just had the baby, and so a doctor named Dr. Sal came down, and he happened to live in Alexandria, Virginia. He was the head of genetics at Washington, D.C. Children's. And so it just happened to be, and he decided he'd get up and take the call when he heard about it.
Right.
And he came in and he looked at me, and I can still remember it to this day, and it's been an inspiration to me ever since. He said, I said, I don't know what Down syndrome is. He goes, first of all, let's just get this clear. You have a baby boy who happens to have Down syndrome. And that became the defining way that I operated as a parent, and the way that my mind was changed from ages 14 to 18 to now being about 30 years old. I began to go, okay, I've got to see the world differently. And it changed how I saw the world, because before I became a Christian, I always thought of talent, ability, achievement. That was the defining thing of your life. And those things are certainly blessings, and they're important. But when you have a child with special needs, you begin to realize how many people can feel invisible in the world, because if we define that way. And I felt the burden to change that in my own mind and my own heart, which that wasn't as much of a challenge as realizing there are a whole lot of people like I used to be who need to be able to make that transition. So out of that, I was already in the ministry, but out of that came a number of the things you mentioned in the introduction, and we can talk more about that. But that sort of gives people sort of a background of where I came from, where our family comes from, and I have 3 kids. My other son has autism, and so my daughter's neurotypical, and so that's our unique and awesome family.
I think that I know that there are challenges that come with having kids, period, even neurotypical kids. But Down syndrome, any experience that I've had with children and adults that have Down syndrome are absolutely so magical. They are the purest, most joyful individuals, I think, that are on planet Earth. I think they're just so wonderful. We worked at a summer camp where it was Camp Barnabas. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Russ, but So all of the campers have Down syndrome, and it was the most eye-opening, amazing experience. That was the best week of the entire summer. They were amazing.
Yeah. Well, I think what we have here is what Kendall referred to as the esports. And we've
Okay.
transitioned and developed that and expanded that to be e-life, and I can talk more about that later. But the E stands for exceptional, and what you just described
Wow.
is what I think about every single individual who is alive, and specifically, it's important. And I think 1 Corinthians 12 is our sort of our context for that, about how even the unpresentable parts of the body needed to be presented in honorable, modest ways. And
Wow.
I think it's about being able to look at people and see the gifts they have to give us. And that's something I've tried to grow in my life, not just regarding special needs, but as a leader, because early in my leadership
Yes.
life, I still had a lot of parts of me that valued people based on human appearance. And of course, we know 1 Samuel 16:7, that God looks on the heart, not the human appearance, but it's just really challenging for
Yes.
us as human beings not to. And so being able to look at people and help them see their gifts. I don't think I realized how many people that don't have a disability are very negative about themselves. And regardless of what they may
Right.
walk around and look like, they have a lot of negative things going through their head. And so the beauty of being able to have special needs children is that you learn to accentuate, highlight, and look for the things they do well, so that they
Right.
can develop confidence and so they can be valued. But in learning that, you end up learning to do it with other people. And that comes with some regret about not having known how to do it prior to that. But growth is good.
It's really encouraging. Just again, I'm so inspired by your heart and your story. Just seeing how you've been able to use your story and to start to help others, and it just gets me excited for this conversation to help church leaders, because this is something that not every church leader knows how to really incorporate into church life. And so, the next question that I'd love to ask you is, many individuals, they feel unseen, they feel overlooked in church settings, and I would just love to ask you, how important would you say it is to create a place of worship that is accessible to everyone?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I'd say is, we have a fairly large church, and so I'll guarantee you someone will listen to this podcast and go, "Well, I'm in your church, Russ, and I'm not seen." So
Oh,
you have to start with, it's not easy to do.
sure.
And we all are innately, at least, well, I'll speak for myself. I'm innately selfish. And so even on my best days, I'm thinking about me, and that's on my
Right.
priority list. So having said that, and I make that point because I think oftentimes it's easy to speak as though one's an expert on something and not reveal the fact that it's always a challenge. I
Sure.
think the importance of it is that you cannot, and this is my goal, you cannot create the Church of the New Testament in any way unless we learn how to, again, 1 Corinthians 12 being a foundational passage or chapter, but also Romans 12 about the gifts that God makes available to us. What I've learned in my life is that I need people to balance me. And so I can be more intense and focused and goal driven. So I need people around me who are more happy, easygoing, and don't turn everything into an experiment in, can I control the world, the world I live in, And so balance is important. And I think this is something we teach in our church, and it's become part of our church culture because we're an inclusive church. And so to just kind of line that up and hopefully answer the question without being too verbose, when Gail and I had Jonathan, the first challenge we faced that we didn't know we were going to face is, where does he go in children's ministry? Because the people in children's ministry were not equipped to work with him. That was not
Right.
part of our culture. And we were part of we were connected with a lot of churches, and we didn't know anybody who had anything that they could tell us about what they did in that situation. And most special needs parents we knew about, which weren't that many, in churches all around the world that we knew about, they didn't have an answer either. And so my wife, who is a very strong leader, creative and capable, and I'm made to look good by a lot of things she does. That if she doesn't show up at a podcast, somebody may think I did. But she was like, we've got to figure this out because I can't even participate in church. And she
Right.
speaks and teaches and does all kinds of things and trains young women and inspires people in the community. And so we came up with what's called the spiritual resource ministry. And if somebody wants to turn their children's ministry into a dynamic, inclusive children's ministry, we have on the bacc.cc site where our church is a spiritual resource handbook that basically tells you how to do it. And what we did is we inspired other parents with neurotypical kids to be part of the children's ministry with kids who are neurodivergent. And then we began to train the workers, older and younger, to be part of it. And we developed the spiritual resource ministry. We now have 9 campuses in our church, and all of those campuses have a spiritual resource ministry. To give you an example of how it's grown is every Easter now we have an inclusive Easter egg hunt. Now our inclusive Easter egg hunt models off of the Bay Area Christian Church's core sort of values, which is doing good and making God known. So if you are a Buddhist, if you're someone who's an atheist, an agnostic like I was, if you're someone who doesn't go to a church like ours, it doesn't matter. We have the Easter egg hunt before church. People can bring their kids. Like I said, we have 9 campuses they can come, and they can bring special needs kids. And so we have them included. So the spiritual resource ministry allows parents and families with special needs to be a part of it. Now let's come back to what you said, Kendall, about how important is it to identify people's gifts? Well, a lot of times, and Jessica can speak to this, I'm sure. I mean, we only know each other now, but I can pretty much guess that she's had to be a creative, innovative parent and find solutions where there were no solutions. And we have to learn how to afford things we can't afford. And we have to learn how to make peace with debt that we don't really want in order to get our kids every opportunity they deserve. Well, a lot of these parents in our church that have special needs kids have become some of our best leaders, just absolutely some of our best leaders, because they have all that. So the beauty of it is, if you're trying to reach Gen Z or millennials who are getting older but are still a young part of every church, this kind of thing brings them in because they're able to see that the church is not simply about older people deciding to do things they want to do, but that they can get involved in making a difference in a kid's life, especially an adult's life. And we have a number of people who've gone on to study special education because in high school, they were part of our program. They've gone on to be PTs. They've gone on to be nurse practitioners, doctors, because of that exposure to it. So when you see the gifts of everyone, not just special needs kids and adults, then you begin to bring out of your church an incredible amount of ability that you wouldn't have otherwise, and it becomes much more attractive to the community, and it serves the community better.
Hearing you just talk through these things, it is very inspiring just to know that you've been able to help so many people with this. And I know for our listeners that are hearing this today, working in a church myself and serving in our church, it makes me want to do more. And so I'm kind of curious, where might churches right now unintentionally be excluding people, and what kind of steps can they take, to really recognize and bridge these gaps to do some of the good things that you've been able to do at your ministry?
Yeah, well, for me, everything started with my relationship with God. And I was looking at Isaiah 40 today, and about how God will allow us to soar when we rely on him instead of our own strength. So honestly, the first place I'd start, if you're a parent, if you're a church leader, if you're just a Christian, is getting a dynamic relationship with God and reading the Bible every day and praying every day, because a lot of obstacles and walls and confusion and lack of resources, it came together because God moved. And, and so I think the first thing is that. And then when you get into the Bible, and I'm really big on, like I said, I was an agnostic. So the singing didn't get me to go to church. The people didn't get me to go to church. I mean, they invited me to go to church, but what made me stay was the truth of the word. And I had read philosophy and studied it a lot, and came away at one point believing Ayn Rand was the philosophy of my life. There's a whole story behind that. But what happened when I read the Bible, I was like, wait a second. I first of all, I didn't know anything about this thing, sin. Nobody had told me about that part. I wasn't too happy about that, but I was really excited that you could you could deal with it, and I was real happy to see you could grow and become someone different. So why do I start there? Because I think that every church leader I've talked to, they first had to change their view of the Bible and start to see that Jesus reaches out to and heals people with disabilities so often.
Wow.
And he includes the people with disabilities. He includes people of different ethnicities. He includes people of different genders. I mean, the guy is just incredible. I mean, when you look at him, right? And so we're supposed to be like him. And the way I see it is he did good, and that gathered crowds, and then he was able to give the message. Now, not everybody stayed, but the key is that's what made it happen. And so I think the question you ask is, how do we exclude people? Well, I think, first of all, speaking bluntly, we have churches oftentimes that are divided by race. I mean, it came from the 1960s. They said the most segregated hour in America is on Sunday morning, and that hasn't changed all that much. Now, I'm not saying that churches need to, if you're in a predominantly whatever neighborhood, you need to go drive all the way over to the other part of the state to get diversity. I'm not talking about that. But I think we need to be attractive in general. And so in particular, the way we exclude people with special needs is we're not educated about it, just like I wasn't. And so the first thing is getting educated about it. And the best way to get educated about it is look in your church and say, who do I have that's a special needs family? And if you're the leader of that church, head over to that home. But first, before you go over to that home, you got to talk to some people and figure out, how do I interact? You got to ask the parents, okay, if you have a child who's blind, if you have a child who's in a wheelchair, if you have a child who has autism, is there anything I need to know or I need to understand? And you educate yourself. And I think that's what, Jesus Paul was probably the best at this, 1 Corinthians 9, becoming all things to all men. And here's the beauty of getting involved in the lives of people with special needs, is it will diversify your set of experiences. So although I'm an African American, I grew up in a neighborhood in an area that was not African American at all. And so what happened in college, is part of my training, I ended up wanting to go work in the urban area of Dorchester, Massachusetts, which is inner city. I'd never been in an area where anybody didn't have a significant set of resources. It changed my entire understanding of the experience of African Americans because I hadn't had to be in an environment like that. And as a result, it diversified my view of life. Being able to go over to a family who has disabilities, to be able to learn what they go through, to be able to walk in their shoes and see what it's like to come to church, or try go grocery shopping with them, or try going to the mall with them and see what it's like to have to deal with a restaurant that doesn't have a ramp, or the ramp is out of function, or the elevator lift is not working, that kind of thing. And when you do that personally, because I believe in personal ministry, one of the reasons I've only recently begun to do like podcasts and do a lot of stuff, because I like being on the ground. I like making put the shoe on the pavement and get moving. And I think that's one thing that will work. Once you do that, when you get up in your pulpit or you walk in your fellowship, you'll look around and you realize how many people don't know about it. And the same thing goes for ethnicity, same thing goes for gender, same thing goes for color. The more educated the minister is, the more he can educate the congregation. I don't think churches don't want people there. I don't think they want to exclude people. But it's just like on race, which is talked about, a lot more than disability is, at least in my experience. Just like on that, I believe most prejudice is because of a lack of education. And I know there will be tons of people who disagree, and I get it. There's structural racism. But the point is, I've been around a lot of people in my life, and a lot of them, until they get educated on things, they just don't know. And the education allows for the inclusion. And so I think that's the responsibility of leadership, whether you work for a church or you're a leader in it as an elder, a deacon, or whatever different role you play. So I hope that it's probably a long-winded answer, but I hope that answers the question.
It does. Can I piggyback on that just a little bit, Kendall?
Sure.
I'd say too, some of it is generational, and this goes back even 2 generations before me. So there was a time when kids with special needs were really not socially accepted at all. And that change has really come about in the last maybe 2 two generations for sure. I mean, I know like even in my school, right, there were kids who were different or had disabilities. And I mean, we had a small school, so everybody was kind of mainstream together, which was beautiful and great and enriching for my education, very much so. But when we even had Noah, I think educating people on how to even approach children with disabilities, adults with disabilities, that's number one piece of the conversation, right? I know one of the biggest things that we navigate with Noah as he's going through different procedures, and I haven't shared this on the podcast before, but Noah has one leg shorter than the other. He was born that way. We also didn't know until we were in the delivery room. And so really didn't have an opportunity to mentally prepare for that, emotionally prepare for any of that. And so, I will say that one of the biggest things that I struggled with, and this is kind of relevant, but also just a point of awareness. I think generations back, it was rude to stare or ask questions. I would argue that now I would much rather people have the boldness to kindly ask questions. And to your point, Russ, try to understand the experience and come curious. Not with a level of full understanding, because I think that that's a pattern that I have seen with our family. And then one of my very best friends has a child who is actually, both of her boys are on the spectrum. One of them is younger. He is just now starting to be verbal at 4 years old. And we've seen just God do amazing things, even within the last 6 months to a year. And it's wonderful. And so, but even with conversations with her and her sharing her heart with me, and she is very vocal on her social media platforms about her experience parenting kids, both of them, who are neurodivergent. And one of the biggest struggles that she comes across is people that are well-intended coming with advice, or, who really don't have perspective on her experience at all, right? And so this is maybe the other side of the coin, right? As church leaders, as a church wanting to build inclusivity, be mindful as you go into those conversations that you should be curious above anything else. You should want to understand, you should want to learn from those families with no prejudice, no bias coming into the conversation. And it's okay to say, hey, I'm coming to this with zero experience. We want to learn from you. How can we do better? And we had this played out in real time at our church. My husband and I were involved in the kids ministry, and Alicia, my friend, came to know the Lord. It's been just over a year now. And so what she has seen, the growth that she's seen in her boys, has been a direct result of her beginning to pray radically, which is so cool. So her whole story is wonderful. And so she started attending our church. Well, she couldn't come on many Sundays because she could not come into the building with her boys because of the massive crowds going in and out at the time of service starting. And so it was one of those little things that she came to us and was like, we can't really go because this is our challenge right now. And there was an opportunity for me to say, girl, I didn't even think about that. I bet you our church, our children's ministry leaders have not considered that. Yeah. As far as I know, let me take that back and see what we can do. And so I think that's just a little bit of a challenge there to church leaders, non-church leaders, everyone, anyone. It's okay to be curious. It's okay. There is a way to be curious and be kind about it. And I'd say the majority of parents that I've talked to that have kiddos with disabilities or special needs will agree that we would rather welcome the questions and help equip our kids, if they're able to advocate and speak up for themselves, give them the opportunity to do that. And then really, really try to find ways, especially if you're talking with kiddos, find ways where your children are the same. And invite that into the conversation as well. And so, Russ, you're talking about, you guys have incorporated this resource into your church. So I'm going to take that back to our church. But also, I'm a little bit curious to know, within that resource, are kids, I guess it's probably different at each location, but are kids all in the same classrooms, and then your leaders are equipped to be able to facilitate a classroom with kids who are neurotypical and neurodivergent?
So what you have is spiritual resource ministry is its own class or set of classes. And so
Okay.
what
Okay,
happens
cool.
is, the typical kids, let's say a kid is a 5-year-old. A
Mm-hmm.
typical 5-year-old will come out of the typical 5-year-old, neurotypical 5-year-old class and be a
Mm-hmm.
part of the spiritual resource ministry
Love
with
it. I
the
love
kid
it.
who's got special needs. And a lot of
Yes.
parents get excited about it and everything. And one, just to support everything you were saying, well, I'll say a couple things there. I'm sure Kendall will have some thoughts on it and perspective on it. The things we're talking about can be overwhelming to a church leader. The average church is 75 people.
Sure.
And so it's overwhelming to think about doing that. And if you have a church of 250, which are now considered large, that can be overwhelming because you're meeting so many needs. And oftentimes ministry staff, they don't have a lot of support for a variety of reasons, not because anybody's against them, but because there's so many needs out there. And so
Right.
one of the things we do a lot is we have pilot programs. And like in the situation you were talking about, Jessica, you can just start spiritual resource ministry with your friends' kids and tell everybody we're going to hope to grow this, but we're going to start with a very small group. And just say it's got to be piloted so we get it right. And that way
Wow.
people don't get overwhelmed. But I agree with everything you said. It's important that everyone know that the new statistic for people with autism specifically is 1 out of every 31 children being born. And so we're talking about
Wow.
something that's not going away. Now, what this means is that let's take the most recent person who's come out as his daughter described him and said he definitely has Asperger's, Bill Gates. A lot of times, now, not every kid who has special needs is Bill Gates. Not every kid, period, is Bill Gates. But I think sometimes we don't often understand that the person we may exclude may be the person that God wants to use to do something
Wow.
far more extraordinary. And how many times have we watched entertainers in the movies, music, professors, leaders say, "Oh, I used to go to church when I was young, but I don't go anymore because this happened or that happened." Now,
Wow.
we're not
Wow.
responsible for everybody who says they didn't like it and had a bad experience, but I think we can make sure that we include, because you never know if that person going through is going to be that guy or that girl. And I tell myself and I tell other parents, I go, remember, you may have thought you were going to be the Apostle Paul or Mary or whoever it is, but maybe it's your kid. And so maybe your job is to be Mary and Joseph and raise the kid, not that you're
Right.
the kid. So
This has been such a good conversation so far. I feel like I'm pulling so many good things from this. Russ, I'm just curious. I know that you have been a strong advocate for using technology to open doors rather than kind of, building walls. Instead of making things more difficult, you've been able to use technology to make things easier. Can you share some ways that you've been able to use technology, or even I know accessibility is a core passion of yours. What about physical spaces and anything digital? Can you share any of those aspects to this?
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. So, as you had mentioned in the introduction, I live in the Silicon Valley, although our church is spread out all around the Bay Area, and I've been here the whole time I've lived. I've lived in Silicon Valley the whole time I've lived here. So, um, you were
Awesome.
well. I chose to be immersed in technology, and going back to what I told you earlier about wanting to be a chemist, the science part of it just kicked on in. And so, when my kids had verbal challenges, I realized that they needed communication devices, and so. Prior to the iPhone, we had bought very expensive devices that were proprietary and very expensive and somewhat bulky to carry around. And as soon as the iPhone came out, and there were some folks out there who created communication software, they posted it or they made it available, and I downloaded it. It was $45, and I got 2 copies. And within about 2 months, it was $300. I was glad I got mine. At that point, I talked to some of the people I knew that were engineers, and I said, I just don't think this is right, because even though people think this is cheaper than the typical adaptive tools that are available from proprietary institutions, it's still very expensive to go get $1,000 iPad
Sure.
and then have to spend $300 on one piece of software. And I was thinking about people that are closed out by, to use an old phrase, the digital divide. And so I sat down with them and I said, let's map out how to create a piece of software that will allow kids to communicate, that we can first do on Android and can do on iOS, and that we can make it available free or we can make it available really cheap. And
Love it.
so we created it. Long story made short, we got it for one part of it is $14, another part is $24. And we've been
Amazing.
going at it for a while to be able to allow people to have it. And we've given it away free to people who had needed it or whatever. For instance, speech and language pathologists will give it to them for free. We don't make our money off that. We do other things technologically as engineers. We have other products and services we produce. And so we don't make money off of it. That's just the bare minimum of what it takes to just pay for
Right.
the business part of it, and like taxes.
Sure.
Can't escape those.
Yeah, I live in California, so we definitely get our share of that. And so that's one. But we also now have over the years broadened to inclusive technology. So a couple of the engineers I work with just met with some of the guys at Facebook about the Meta glasses, because what we're doing is we're taking technology that they're creating and finding applications for those with disabilities that they can use. So people with dyslexia can use the glasses, and the glasses can see and then read to them without anybody even knowing that's happening. And as you probably know, there's a lot of work being done eventually to getting AI on that, which is going to be crazy for colleges, but that where they can look and they can see and they can get the answer. So we go and grab any technology now. We don't just focus on creating it ourselves, but on looking at what they've got and what we're trying to do is build partnerships with people and people who've helped us in the past. I'm not saying that they are like that we're some big time people with them, but in the past, Google has done a lot to help us to be able to be seen on the store and to get involved. And we've helped to be able to bring about some accessibility and inclusion in the times. And a lot of these companies are committed to accessibility. As far as spaces are concerned, we have a big service every year. I think last year we had it's called Shoreline Amphitheater. We had I think the attendance was over 6,000 or whatever, and so that's a lot of people, right? And as Jessica was talking about, when you have kids with autism, special needs, that's a sensory overload. And for those who are listening, you'll have to go look that up, or I'll take up too much time. I've already taken a lot talking about sensory, but so what we do is we create spaces, quiet spaces, and sensory spaces. So we'll have tents around the area where movies are being shown and where special workers are available. Last year, I had a parent pull me inside, and trust me, I did not do the work of putting it up or any of that. But he said, I just want to thank you for creating these spaces. Well, we began to create them when our generation of kids were special needs. But now, here we are almost 30 years later, and here's a young toddler of this guy, but this guy deserves it because he's been giving and supporting the work long before he had a kid. And so we have those kind of spaces. I could go on. We have outdoor things we do. You're going to love this one. We have on our eLife program, we started with eSoccer, and I don't have time to tell you the whole story. It started with 8 people, and I was just doing it to help my kids have friends, and now it's become like 1,000 all around the Bay, and it's in other cities and countries, and we're trying to spread it. But we have partnerships with the Golden State Warriors and partnerships with the San Jose Earthquakes, our professional soccer team. And so the Golden State Warriors, every year, they have the kids in, special needs with typical kids. They have them in to do little practices with them and teach them, but they play at halftime of the Warriors game on autism night. And so it's really exciting. And the Earthquakes bring them in all the time. They bring their club team in. What I want to say to the church leaders out there, and again, you may not have the resources we have, but remember, we've been at this for 30 years. So it didn't happen overnight. It started with my wife holding Jonathan and us having no place for him to be. So people just need to remember that's where it starts, and you just have to have faith in that relationship with God. But those are the kind of spaces we've created for people to be able to bring their families and take them. And anything we do, we try to make it inclusive.
That's incredible. And that really helps with, you're attracting people to your church, to your ministry, to these programs that may not necessarily have any kind of church affiliation. They may not be a believer, but they have a need, right?
That's right. Absolutely. And to me, early on in my training, I was trained during the heavy church growth sort of movement time in the 80s or so. And that wasn't bad. But what happened, it's always good to see people become Christians, no matter what. Yes. But what happened, in my view, this is just my perspective, I'm not saying I'm all knowing and right about everything. But what happened is we neglected the essential part of Jesus' ministry, which is doing good. to be able to heal somebody without demanding that they, come and be a part of what they're part of. And some people may feel like, well,
Wow.
that's not going to help the church grow, or that's not what the mission is. I respect that. You can absolutely believe that. I just don't believe that. And the reason I don't believe that is I came at church as an agnostic. So when I came, I was like, I saw more power in science than I saw in the church. I saw more impact being made by people in the world than I saw in the church, because I didn't go to church. I looked at people outside of church. And so if we're not doing the kind of things that set us apart from especially the cruelty we see today, and I'm not talking about one side of anything. I'm talking about, it's just part of, you go on social media, It's like, seriously, people. Like these are, maybe you don't agree, but that's a human being. I think it's really great to shine the light as Jesus called us to, and by doing good. And it I'll tell you what, the percentage of our kids in our church that involve themselves in our inclusive ministries that go on to become Christians is extraordinarily high. Extraordinarily high. It's because once that touches someone's heart, it opens up the chambers, if you would, to be able to have empathy and understanding of the fragility of life, which I did not have when I was young. And I think God worked in my life to go, you need to understand that not everybody can be strong, and not everybody has resources, and not everybody has the parents you have, and et cetera, et cetera. And, one day I was talking to a guy I knew who was, in the foster program, and he was working at a coffee shop, and he was like, yeah, I haven't done anything with my life. And, you've done this and you've done that. And I said, well, hang on a minute. I said, let me tell you how I grew up. And let me tell you what I got based on what my parents did. I was on third base. You weren't even on the team yet. And so you made the team, and you're starting out from the beginning. You've already done more with your life in many ways than I've done, because I didn't have to overcome any of that. Wow. And I think it's important that we understand people are fragile. And again, it's something I did not understand. And I have the mistakes and the train wrecks of how I thought and what I did in my past to inform my present and my future. And I hope to inspire others to do the same.
Your heart is soft, Russ. I feel like it takes a level of humility to be able to recognize what you weren't, what you are, what you want to be, and then vocalize that in such a way that's so inspiring and encouraging.
Helps others to do the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's so great.
One of the big themes that we have for this podcast is to try to help build healthy churches and healthy leaders. And I'm just curious, as you're speaking to these church leaders today, what would you tell them is your opinion of what a healthy church is?
Well, there's a lot of books out there about that, and a lot of people who've written a lot about that, and I think there's a lot to be said for it. And I've studied a great deal of it. I'll go back to, this is just me. I think at the core of a great and healthy church is the relationship with God of the people who lead it. And when I first started out and decided to not go into politics, which was my goal, and to go into the ministry, I did not understand how to lead spiritually. And so I just brought everything I knew. And so I had I had to guess I had some talents and abilities, but they weren't the kind that necessarily develop people healthily. And that doesn't mean I didn't do good. I think God uses us all to do good along our journey. But I think you got to start with a great relationship with God. And every day I wake up and I try to see the truth about who I am, and being self-aware without being discouraged by that. That informs my understanding that even though I like to take credit for everything I can, I have to realize that the truth of the matter is it's all being done because God's trying to accomplish his purposes. And so I think the health starts if we can, as leaders, stay in a space where we understand our humility is most important with God, not people. People may not always think we're humble. That you can't try to impress people. I've spent a lot of time doing that. You can't try to impress people. You've got to keep your relationship with God straight. Then second, I think you just have to create a spiritual culture. I was mentioning about the chemistry. I just transformed or changed the newsletter of we have a site called Deep Spirituality, which is created for people who don't necessarily go to church and who go to church, but to reach out to people like me And it's all about being spiritual and how spirituality is really powerful in Christianity, though not always communicated. But I just started a new newsletter called The Chemistry Lab. And the whole goal of the Chemistry Lab is to help people have discovery about spiritual things. And it's to help our church, too, to get our church to have a culture of spirituality. So what do I mean? Oftentimes there's division. There is in our church, there's division, there's arguments, there's fights. If everybody keeps their focus on God is my motivation, God is my focus, God is my drive. I'm trying to please God. If someone hurts me, discourages me, ignores me, leaves me out, I can talk about it, but I'm not going to be dependent on whether or not they change or treat me differently, because my life is not defined by them. It's defined by God's choice of me. And I think we'll be healthier when we're like that. And there are other people who know a lot more about some of these areas than I do. But my deal is, if you have a great relationship with God, with yourself and everybody in your church, marriages are built that way, then things go really, really well. And you're never going to get it perfect, although I keep trying because I have problems and issues with perfectionism. But you're never going to get it perfect, but you can definitely get it spiritual.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this was so good.
So good.
I feel like we could talk for a long, long, long time. But we need to wrap up.
Yep.
And we do something with all of our guests called the Final Five. And so these are just quick fire questions. And this helps us know you a little bit better. And
I'm kind of curious to see if these have changed since the last time he's been on the podcast, too.
Yeah.
So this is going to be exciting.
Yeah. Okay. So number one is, what is one book on this subject that we talked about primarily today that you recommend to church leaders?
Oh, on this subject. Oh, man. I came in prepared with a different book.
That's okay. We'll take that one, too.
We can take one or both. But I actually do want a recommendation on this subject, if you have one.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you that the best recommendation I can give you is any book by Temple Grandin, who has autism, and an older movie which stars, I can't remember her name now, the star of Homeland. She plays at a younger age Temple Grandin in a movie, and it's extraordinary to watch as far as learning about people with autism. Reading her books will really educate you about how an autistic mind, now she's a highly functional person with autism, but it'll educate you with how an autistic mind works. The other book I've been reading that I think is important is The History of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. The reason is because a lot of times as leaders, we're trying to speak to a community that is coming from the position that a lot of the people talked about in the history of philosophy are coming from, and we don't understand their core thoughts and where they're coming from. So that's my long-winded answer. Sorry.
Twofer. We got a twofer. That's great. Okay, this one's kind of fun. What's the last thing you listened to on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you stream music? And you have to be honest.
Anderson .Paak. That's how he's my new guy, but he swears all the time, so it's a challenge.
I love it.
I have to sift through his stuff, but Anderson .Paak, he's a young performer who has a sense of culture and communication with people that are Gen Z that I want to learn from.
That's good. That's inspiring. I love it. Okay. What's your favorite piece of technology or software right now?
Probably iPad using OneNote.
Okay. Interesting.
Always a good one.
Yeah. Okay. I have to pull up my other screen because my questions got cut off here. So next is quote or advice that has stuck with you over the years.
Well, Bobby Knight is an old coach of the Indiana Hoosiers who a lot of people have negative things to say about because he had his issues, but I don't know. I have my issues. So this quote was, I read it in a book back in the early 90s. So I'm pretty sure he said it because it was attributed to him. Discipline is doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it to the best of your ability. And I've held on to that quote ever since I heard it.
Yeah, I needed that today. One. I didn't make it to the gym, so that's a really good reminder. Thank you for that. Maybe I'll go after work. One thing you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
Joshua chapter 1, battle discouragement with everything you've got. I think discouragement in life it's like the movie Dune. It says fear is the mind killer, but for spiritual people, discouragement can be a mind and a heart killer. And so I think we have
Wow.
to take discouragement seriously and not allow ourselves to be discouraged, to understand that God is watching. He's not finished. And sometimes, as we know from Jacob, Joseph, Ruth, Naomi, the story has to continue before you get to the happy ending.
Wow.
That's so good.
Wow.
So good. Thank you, Russ.
This has been an amazing conversation. And I know that our listeners will want to know, how can they hear more? How can they find more about you and these different programs and things that you've mentioned?
Well, one thing I'm excited about is the new Chemistry Lab podcast or Chemistry Lab newsletter. So they can go to deepspirituality.com and they can find all the kind of content from there. If they want to get the Spiritual Resource Handbook, which I think it's called Handbook, but which is available free. We made it available free. My wife and her team put it together. You can go to bacc.cc and then just search for spiritual resources, and you will find the handbook. You can download it, and you can use it to begin building a spiritual resource ministry. And if you want to see the other things like Digital Scribbler, all the other stuff, you can just go to russewell.com, and all the different things I work on are there. And I just say this at the end. I'm here representing hundreds of people who do all the work. I don't want anybody to get confused and think I'm doing all that stuff. I get to be the person who talks about it, but there are tons of people right around the corner from me, even working right now on all that and making it happen.
Amazing.
And tons of people in our church who are not paid, who lay down their life and do this every day. And that's why I like being in the Bay Area Christian Church. I've loved being on, and I loved hearing all that both of you said, and appreciate what you do. And I forgot to mention, I am a follower and a subscriber. By the way, on YouTube. I mostly listen on Spotify, and I don't think I realized that the host had changed. I just kept listening. I don't think
Well, that's good.
I love it. Well, we're glad to have your support. And I can just tell you, thank you so much, Russ, for taking time today to talk with us. And it is hearing your story. I mean, it has really moved me, and it has helped me truly to see the need. And I feel like I'm so hopeful seeing the different things that you've been able to put into place for our listeners, for these churches and ministry leaders to be able to go and make a difference in their communities. And so thank you so much for your encouragement and for sharing these practical tips and resources today. It's going to be amazing. Of course, we'll link everything up in our show notes so that our listeners can get these resources, and also all of your website and all of those things. We'll have those linked up so that people can find out more, because I truly believe after this conversation that they're going to want to hear more. So I love that. Thank you again for being on here, and Jess, thank you for being on here co-hosting with me. Sure. It's been a great hour that we've been able to spend together today. And for all of our listeners, if this episode has impacted you, we would just ask you to consider sharing it with a friend, or even to go and leaving a comment on our YouTube channel. Leave a review for us to let us know what you think about these topics. It helps us to keep equipping leaders just like you. And so every little bit helps. When you share and you support us, it goes a really long way, and it means a lot to us. So hit that follow button over on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and leave us a review. We'd love that. But until next time, keep leading well, and we will see you all right back here next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple-to-use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.